Chapter 23:12. Li Mosen was removing the gauze. When he heard this, he chuckled. "I'm not bored." Li Jianrui snorted angrily. "You're so annoying." Su Qianxi laughed and then drove Li Jianrui away. "All right, don't mess around here. Go think about what to eat for lunch and let Nanny Rong make it." "Okay." Li Jianrui answered cheerfully and gladly took over this heavy responsibility. The dishes that Li Jianrui ordered that day were all surprisingly strong and healthy. When she returned home, she forced a lot of food on Li Mosen. Li Jianrui sat on the sofa and watched TV after eating and drinking. Nanny Rong was cleaning the house. Su Qianxi went to work, and Li Jianxian and Yu Chulin went to class. In the huge villa, only the sound of the TV echoed. Li Jianrui suddenly felt a tremble in her heart and a little cold. She pulled the blanket next to her and leaned against the back of the sofa. Her eyes looked at the TV, but they were not focused. After a long time, Li Jianrui leaned against the sofa and closed her eyes. She had a dream. In the dream, she returned to that terrible hotel room. People, a lot of people. They were all men. They looked old and ugly. When they smiled, they showed their black and dirty teeth. Their turbid eyes stared at her lecherously, as if they wanted to bite her from head to toe. And in front of her, there was a terrible face with a long scar. He smiled ferociously and couldn't wait to tear off his belt and pounce on her. Li Jianrui was so scared that she screamed and flinched, but no matter what, she couldn't escape. "No, I beg you, no, help, Ursu, wake up." Li Mosen's voice sounded in her ear, and Li Jianrui suddenly opened her eyes. Her vision was a little blurry, but soon, she saw Li Mosen's deep and exquisite face. His blue eyes were full of concern. Seeing that she was awake, he was obviously relieved. Li Mosen whispered, it's okay." Li Jianrui was a little stunned. Suddenly, she opened her mouth and burst into tears. She hugged Mosen's waist. Being hugged by her, Li Mosen felt as if his heart had been hit, and the pain was unbearable. He hugged her tightly and gently patted her back. It's okay, Li Jianrui buried her head in her hands and cried bitterly. Nanny Rong watched from the side with a worried look on her face. She gestured to Li Mosen behind Ursu to take her back to her room. Li Mosen understood and coaxed her to stand up. He then sent her to her room. Li Jianrui's room was a classic princess room. Cute velvet dolls were placed one after another in a pink Northern European style. Together with the pile of dolls, they looked very girlish. Li Mosen let her sit on the bed and bent down to take off her shoes. "Be good," he said. "We're already home. Those people have already paid the price. All of them have been sent by Dad to Africa to do hard labor. We'll never see them again." Li Jianrui didn't know where this sentence had struck a chord in Li Jianrui. The little girl suddenly laughed. Seeing her smile, Li Mosen's mood also relaxed a lot. Grabbing her feet, he placed them on the bed and said, "Sleep." Li Jianrui sniffled. Suddenly, she hugged Li Mosen again. "Brother Mosen." Li Mosen raised his hand and touched her head. He asked calmly, "What's wrong? Are you going abroad?" Li Mosen stopped stroking her head. After a moment of silence, he replied, "Yes." Baidu wanted to read the latest chapter of the 99th Divorce Claw book house for free. Chapter 23:13. Although Li Jianrui was prepared, her tears still fell. She choked and said, "Will you miss me?" Li Mosen didn't even think about it and said, "Yes." After a pause, he added, "Every day." Li Jianrui hugged his waist and sobbed. She seemed to want to say something, but in the end, she swallowed it back. Li Mosen's departure time was set for half a month later. His body had completely recovered. The procedures for going abroad and entering school had been completed a long time ago. No matter how reluctant Li Mosen was, there would always be a time to say goodbye. Li Xicheng and Su Qianxi sent him to the airport. After accompanying him to get the boarding pass, Su Qianxi's tears suddenly rolled down. In order not to let the child see, Su Qianxi deliberately turned her back. Li Xiqing gently hugged his wife and looked at Li Mosen deeply. He said, "Take care of yourself when you are outside. You are an adult. In the future, you have to learn to take care of yourself." Li Mosen looked at Su Qianxi's crying appearance and suddenly wanted to retreat. The reluctance and sadness in his heart were stirring at this moment. In the face of Li Xiqing's advice, Li Mosen nodded heavily. Su Qianxi wiped her tears and broke free from Li Xiqing's hand. She went forward to hug her grown son and said, "It's cold outside. Remember to keep warm. When you go back to the apartment at night, remember to make yourself a cup of ginger tea to warm up. Okay. Remember to build a good relationship with your classmates. Outside is not like at home. Many people are unreasonable. Bear with it when you should. If you can't bear it anymore, remember to fight back. Okay. Your English is not bad, but it is not our own country. You have to learn more humbly and integrate into their society. But remember, you will always be a Chinese, understand? Okay." Su Qianxi thought for a moment. It seemed that she had said almost everything she needed to say on the way here. She touched her son's face reluctantly, hugged him, and said, "Remember to call home. Mom loves you." Li Mosen's emotions, which had been suppressed for a long time, finally came out at this moment. His eyes turned red in an instant. He hugged Su Qianxi back. Li Xiqing also came forward and hugged his wife and Li Mosen together. He said, "Study well, I'll wait for you to come back." "All right," Li Mosen replied. Dragging the suitcase, Li Mosen looked back one last time. Suddenly, his gaze landed on something far behind Li Xiqing. Li Jianxian and Yu Chulin led Li Jianyue and stood far behind them. Li Jianyue seemed to be crying. When she saw him turn around, she waved at him and shouted, "Remember to come back." Her voice was loud, and many people turned to look at her. The crisp roar made Li Mosen tighten his grip on the lever. In a flash, he turned around and entered the security checkpoint as if he was fleeing. Li Xiqing had said that she could not back down from anything. He would have to take this step sooner or later. Humans always needed to grow. There can be no construction without destruction. After passing the security check, Li Mosen had to go through a long process before boarding the plane. After boarding the plane, he took out his phone. Just as he was about to turn it off, he suddenly received a WeChat message from Li Jianyue. She said, "I will wait for you to come back." The corners of Li Mosen's lips curled up slightly, but the tears had already fallen. He quickly wiped his face, turned off his phone, and officially embarked on the journey home. Read the latest chapter of 99th Divorce Claw Book House for free. Chapter 23:14. When she arrived at the apartment arranged by Li Xiqing, it was night time in the United States. The weather was a little cold. Li Mosen wrapped himself tightly in his down jacket. When he entered the house, he found that all the daily necessities were ready. The house was not big, about 30 square meters, and it was very close to the school. There was a small kitchen, a bathroom, and a 1.5-meter bed. Next to the bed was a desk, and when she looked up, she could see a huge bookshelf. There wasn't much space left. After putting down the suitcase, all that was left was an open space. This was the place where he would live for the next 5 years. Time passed in a flash. Li Jianyue was like many college students. When she was in her 3rd year of high school, she would study from morning to night. Each of her brothers was smarter than the other, but their IQ was not distributed to her at all. Li Jianyue could only hold on tightly in her last year of high school, hoping to be admitted to Kingstown University. Kingstown University was one of the top 15 universities in the country. Although the major that Li Jianyue wanted to apply for was relatively unpopular, the cutoff point was still very high. On the day of the results, Li Jianyue screamed and rolled up from the sofa. Her voice almost penetrated the ceiling. "Ah, Mom. I passed. Daddy, 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 daddy. Ah." This scream startled the entire family. Li Jianxian had just finished showering and came downstairs when he was greeted by a pounce. Li Jianyue hugged him and shouted, "It's over, it's over, it's over." Li Jianxian was so noisy that his eardrums were about to burst. He pulled her down and said, "You're so heavy. Be quiet." Li Jianyue didn't mind being thrown out. Her smile was still cheerful. "It's over, it's over. It's exactly half a point more." Hearing this, Li Jianxian laughed out loud. "You're really something. You got into Kingstown University's major with the lowest score requirement, and you only scored 0.5 points. Li Jianyue was so angry that she put her hands on her hips. "Anyway, I passed." Sure. Li Xicheng and Su Qianxi were overjoyed and discussed having a celebration party for her the next day. Li Jianyue jumped up the stairs proudly. When she returned to her room, she took out her phone and video called Li Mosen. It should be 7:00 in the morning in the United States. Li Mosen picked up the phone after a while. The screen was a little shaky. Li Jianyue screamed excitedly, "Brother Mosen." Cough, cough, cough. Violent coughing sounds came from the other side. Then, the image was adjusted to face his face. Li Mosen was brushing his teeth, and his mouth was full of foam. He looked at her in shock and asked, "What happened?" Li Jianyue couldn't help but laugh out loud. She happily hugged her phone and rolled on the bed. "I got in." Li Mosen heaved a sigh of relief and laughed out loud. Li Jianyue saw him pick up the cup next to him to rinse his mouth and then continue to brush his teeth. When Li Jianyue saw this, she was unhappy and said angrily, "Why are you reacting like this?" Li Mosen brushed his teeth and said vaguely, "It's expected." Li Jianyue was even more unhappy. How did this become something to be expected? She was actually panicking inside. Li Jianyue angrily hung up the phone. When Li Mosen saw this, he quickly called back. However, Li Jianyue didn't pick it up no matter what. She even sent him a humph emoji. Li Mosen smiled. He thought that she wouldn't be angry after a while, so he hurriedly packed up, put on his backpack, and stepped out of the door. Chapter 23:15. Who knew that Li Jianyue's anger lasted a little longer this time? She didn't talk to him for 3 days in a row. Li Mosen had recently developed a new project with his classmates. He was so busy that he hadn't even eaten yet. He resigned himself to his fate and cooked 2 packets for himself. While cooking, Li Mosen called Li Jianyue. The call was quickly connected. Li Mosen didn't know if it was an illusion, but he vaguely heard a very silly ringtone in front of his house. It sounded like Li Jianyue's style. Then, the doorbell rang. Li Mosen had just put down the noodles and heard the doorbell. He asked in English, "Who is it?" He turned around and walked to the door. The person on the other end of the phone suddenly answered the phone. The voice on the other end of the phone sounded at the same time as the voice outside the door. "Open the door." Li Mosen was shocked. His actions were faster than his mind and he turned the door handle. Li Jianyue held the phone in her hand and smiled brightly. "Hello," she said. A sweet voice sounded in front of him, but Li Mosen froze in place. Li Jianyue saw that he was stunned. She smiled and squeezed in. "It smells so good. Are you cooking instant noodles?" As she said that, she had already pushed Li Mosen away and dragged her small pink suitcase in. "Oh, I'm so hungry." Li Mosen closed the door and turned to look at Li Jianyue. He asked, How did I know you were here, right?" Li Jianyue smiled and put down the suitcase. Then, she rushed into the small kitchen. "I have the address." Li Mosen. "Why did you come alone?" "Because brother and brother Chu are coming to the seminar, so I came with them." Li Jianyue touched her growling stomach. "So little. Do you have more?" Li Mosen was happy. Only then did he realize that deep in his heart, he couldn't suppress the smile on his lips. He walked to the refrigerator and took out 2 packets of instant noodles. He opened them and asked, "Do you want eggs?" "Yes." "And ham." Li Jianyue rubbed her small hands. She almost drooled. "Wow, I haven't eaten instant noodles for a long time." Li Mosen glanced at her. "Go wash your hands." "Okay." Li Jianyue left quickly. When she came out of the bathroom after washing her hands, Li Mosen had already turned off the fire. He took out the small pot and Li Jianyue volunteered to get the bowls and chopsticks. Then, she ate with a satisfied look on her face. Li Mosen looked at Li Jianyue and found that she looked more exquisite and beautiful than in the video. 3 years ago, most of the baby fat on her face had disappeared. Now, Li Jianyue was 20 years old and pretty. Li Mosen's eyes were gentle, and he couldn't suppress the smile on his lips. "Eat slowly." "Ow." Li Jianyue's mouth was scalded and she quickly fanned herself. Li Mosen quickly poured her a glass of warm water and placed it beside her hand. It had always been a habit. Even though they hadn't seen each other for 3 years, he didn't feel the slightest bit rusty. Li Mosen's heart was full. Looking at her cute little face as usual, he asked, "Where's Daesu?" Li Jianyue took it and drank it. She said, "They went to the hotel arranged by the conference. I said I'd come to look for you." "Heh heh. Why didn't you tell me before you came?" Li Mosen was a little reproachful. "There's nothing to eat at home. Fortunately, I didn't tell you. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to eat instant noodles." Li Jianyue drank a mouthful of instant noodle soup in satisfaction. "Do you usually eat instant noodles?" Baidu read the latest chapter of 99th Divorce Claw Bookhouse for free. Chapter 23:16. Occasionally. It was rare for Li Jianyue to be so serious. She said, "Eating instant noodles is not good for your health. Mom said that if I catch you eating instant noodles, I will tell her." Li Mosen smiled. "Young lady, so you're not here to see me, but to supervise me?" "Yes." Li Jianyue said confidently. "Hurry up and eat. After eating, I will sleep." "Ah, I am so sleepy." "You are really." Li Mosen wanted to say something, but he was at a loss for words. He laughed out loud. After Li Jianyue finished eating the noodles, she rummaged through her small suitcase and took out a pink nightgown. "I am going to take a shower." "Okay." Li Mosen ate the noodles. "There is a toothbrush and a disposable bath towel on the cabinet." "Okay." Li Jianyue wandered to the bathroom. When she turned on the hot water, she complained, "This hot water heats up too slowly." Li Mosen ate the noodles and said faintly, "Who asked you to come? The conditions for international students are so difficult." "Humph." Li Mosen chuckled and was in a good mood as he cleaned up the dishes. He also cleaned up the room. Li Jianyue's small suitcase was open, revealing a gift box inside. The gift box was light gray and looked carefully wrapped. There was a small note on it with a big smiley face and a few words, "For Brother Mosen." It was also sprayed with perfume. It was sweet. Li Mosen's eyes softened. He gently stroked the gift. Then, he sat on the couch and pulled the ribbon. It was a tie clip. The tie clip looked a little simple. There were small diamonds inlaid on it. A brand logo was very obscure on it. A tie clip. Li Mosen usually wore a suit and a tie, but he had never tried a tie clip. This girl must have found out that he didn't have the habit of putting a tie clip on during the video call, so she bought such a thing. Li Mosen took out a tie and put it on. He tried it on. He couldn't suppress the corners of his mouth. Li Mosen's heart was filled with such a surprise. So good. Li Jianyue came out of the shower and saw that he had already opened the gift. She exclaimed in surprise, "Aya, why are you so fast? I wanted to give you a surprise." Li Mosen took off his tie clip and put it back solemnly. He gave her a sideways glance and chuckled. "I've already received the bigger surprise. This is nothing." Li Jianyue angrily put her hands on her hips again. "It's nothing. Give it back to me. As he spoke, he reached out to snatch it away. Li Mosen quickly raised his hand and said, You want to take back what you've given away? I'll take it. Li Jianwei reached out to grab it again, but she was once again stopped by Li Mosen. However, she used too much force, and her whole body fell forward. Li Jianwei exclaimed and quickly hugged his head. Li Mosen closed his eyes and could only smell the faint fragrance coming from her chest. Li Jianwei suddenly felt an itch in her chest. She paused for a moment and then bounced away. Ah! Li Jianwei didn't know the severity of the situation. Her actions were a little fierce again. Li Mosen hurriedly supported her. He wrapped his arms around her waist and held her firmly in his arms. Li Jianwei opened her eyes wide and looked at him. The distance between the tips of their noses was less than 3 centimeters. Inexplicably, Li Jianwei's face burned. She pushed him away and said, If you don't want to return it, then I won't. I'll give it to you. Humph. Li Mosen suddenly felt a little dry. He licked his lips and watched as she angrily jumped onto his bed. The corners of his mouth rose silently. Chapter 23:17. After putting away the tie clip, Li Mosen walked towards her and said, You sleep here. Where should I sleep? Humph. Li Jianwei covered her head with the blanket and ignored him. Li Mosen was helpless. After taking a shower, he returned to the table. He turned off the lights in the room and turned on the small table lamp to deal with work. Li Jianwei turned around and found that he was still writing and drawing. She thought that he was studying and said, It's so late. Aren't you going to sleep? Wait for me to finish. Okay. Li Jianwei moved inwards. Sleep early. I'm going to sleep first. As she said that, she patted the spot next to her and closed her eyes. Li Mosen's heart skipped a beat. Then, he felt a little helpless and muttered to himself, Why aren't you on guard at all? Sigh. Li Mosen lowered his head and continued to work. By the time he finished what he was doing, it was already 2 hours later. The little person on the bed was already sound asleep. At this moment, her legs were already raised and she was breathing evenly with the blanket between her legs. Li Mosen stood up and tucked her in. Li Jianwei pouted and turned over, moaning. Li Mosen's movements were slightly stiff. Looking at her pink little mouth, his heart suddenly beat faster. The little person on the bed was still sleeping soundly. Li Mosen looked at her face, inch by inch, and approached her. He saw that he was getting closer and closer. Suddenly, the pair of fan-like eyelashes in front of him opened, revealing the dark and bright eyes inside. At this moment, the pair of eyes were hazy and sleepy. She looked at Li Mosen and blinked. Li Mosen's nerves all over his body tensed up. For a moment, he didn't know how to react. Li Jianwei looked at him. Suddenly, she reached out and hooked her arms around his neck. Li Jianwei asked, Do you want to kiss me? She sounded sleepy and a little confused. Li Mosen's heart skipped a beat and his body stiffened. Li Jianwei pouted and leaned forward to kiss him on the mouth. Her movements were very fast. Li Mosen's lips seemed to be electrified. Even his heart seemed to be installed with an engine, beating rapidly. Then, Li Jianwei let go of him and said, Why aren't you sleeping yet? Her tone was too natural, just like the kiss just now. It was as if it was the most natural thing for her. Li Mosen suddenly felt a little empty in his heart. He didn't feel very comfortable. When Li Jianwei saw him in a daze, she patted the seat beside her and said, Come on up. Li Mosen's Adam's apple bobbed. Then, he kicked off his slippers and climbed up. He turned off the light and lay down. Li Jianwei closed her eyes again. Li Mosen looked above his head for a long time and suddenly asked, Do you often do this to Desu? What? Li Ersu asked in a muffled voice. In the same bed. Yeah. Li Jianwei yawned. We're siblings. Li Mosen felt as if his heart had been choked. He felt a little uncomfortable. Oh. After a minute of silence, Li Mosen asked again, "What about kissing?" Li Jianyue covered herself with the blanket and suddenly giggled. When Li Mosen heard her laughter, he felt a little upset. Unexpectedly, Li Jianyue, who was next to him, suddenly lay on his body. Her eyes were especially bright in the dark night. "Of course not. How could I kiss my brother?" Li Mosen's heart beat faster. In an instant, he began to let his imagination run wild. Li Jianyue shifted her body upwards and looked at him. She asked softly, "Can I kiss you?" Baidu wanted to read the latest chapter of The 99th Divorce Claw Book House for free. Chapter 23:18. Li Mosen even held his breath. He looked at her and was silent for a moment. Li Jianyue leaned forward, puckered her lips, and kissed his mouth. Li Mosen's whole body was stiff. He felt the soft touch on his lips, and his heart was in turmoil. In the end, he couldn't help but reach out and hug her. Li Jianyue exclaimed, and then her lips were blocked by Li Mosen. Li Mosen kissed her deeply and heavily. But other than their lips touching, there was nothing else that went further. Li Jianyue's face was burning. She blinked her eyes, and then, she tentatively stuck out her tongue to lick his lips. Like an electric shock, Li Mosen's whole body stiffened again. The warm and fragrant body in his arms, starting from his lips, seemed to have a warm current quietly spread to his limbs and bones. An indescribable feeling spread throughout his body. Li Jianyue saw that he didn't respond, and once again stuck out her tongue like in the novel. Li Mosen's whole body was burning, but in the end, he still couldn't bear to push her away. He hugged her and kissed her again and again. Until his mouth hurt, he couldn't bear to let go. In the end, Li Jianyue was the first to retreat. She got down from him and then shrank to the inside of the bed. The night was very late. Li Jianyue felt that her heart was about to explode. Li Mosen felt that his body was a little tense and uncomfortable. He didn't dare to approach, but he couldn't help but want to get closer and closer. Li Jianyue gripped the quilt tightly and turned her back to him. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep. However, just as she brewed enough sleepiness, her waist suddenly tightened. He hugged her. Li Jianyue could clearly hear her own heartbeat, as well as the pulse on his arm that was hugging her. In the whole world, there was only the sound of breathing and heartbeat. Li Jianyue's whole body was stiff, and so was Li Mosen. However, they were in a stalemate. No one moved first, and no one spoke first. After an unknown period of time, Li Mosen heard the sound of breathing in his arms. Li Mosen couldn't help but laugh. His heart was filled with satisfaction. He quietly hugged her tightly, kissed her on the top of her head, and whispered, "Good night." Li Jianyue slept in a daze. He didn't know what she was dreaming of, and she whimpered, "I love you too." Li Mosen couldn't help but hug her tighter and close his eyes. Unsurprisingly, he suffered from insomnia. Because he had something urgent to deal with, he went out at dawn. By the time he returned, Li Jianyue had already left. On the dining table, there were a few plates, covered with lids, with a note on them, "No matter how busy you are, remember to eat." "I'm leaving." Li Jianyue followed Li Jianxian and Yu Chulin around before returning to Kingstown. The summer vacation passed quickly. As a freshman, Li Jianyue was tanned during the military training. It wasn't easy for her to make it to the end and crawl home. As soon as she entered the door, she heard a piece of good news. Both Li Xicheng and Su Qinsi were very happy. They told her that Li Mosen had made more than 1 million in business with his classmates in the United States. During this process, Li Mosen didn't ask for a single cent from his family. He even used his living expenses to invest without his parents' knowledge. Li Jianyue's heart warmed when she heard that. She quickly went upstairs and video called Li Mosen. In the next 2 years, Li Mosen seemed to have turned on a cheat code. He registered a company abroad with his classmates, and it was doing very well. Baidu, read the latest chapter of 99th Divorce Claw Book House for free. Chapter 23:19. The company's registered fund was also paid by Li Mosen himself. But Li Jianyue could see that he seemed to be very busy and tired. Every time she video called him, his face couldn't hide the tiredness and dark circles under his eyes. There were even a few times when he was video calling with her, he was so tired that he fell asleep. Li Jianyue held her cheeks and listened to the sound of him sleeping. Her heart ached a little. It had been exactly 5 years since Li Mosen went to the United States. 5 years ago, Li Mosen set foot on this strange land alone. 5 years later, Li Mosen had completed all the subjects and won countless praises from his tutors and classmates. In the end, when everyone thought that he would continue to develop in the United States, he chose to sell the company to a classmate who was working with him, leaving only a portion of the shares. When he came back, he didn't tell anyone. Li Jianyue had recently been acting in a school play, and because she played the female lead of the play, she was named the campus belle of Kingstown University. Since she became famous, there was no lack of people looking at her when she walked on the road. It was common for boys to come and strike up a conversation, so everyone was used to it. Li Jianyue held a few books and walked with her roommates on the road. In front of her, there were a few boys pushing each other. Finally, one of them who looked a little shy was pushed out. The little boy looked very shy. He scratched his head and said somewhat old-fashioned, "Hello, Li Jianyue. I'm Chen Yuan from the computer science department. I think you're very cute. I want to make friends with you." Li Jianyue's roommate next to her snickered. There are many people who want to make friends with Jianyue. Isn't it because they like her? Li Jianyue was already used to it. She smiled awkwardly and was about to speak. Suddenly, she caught a glimpse of something behind Chen Yuan. Li Jianyue was stunned for a moment, and then her eyes lit up. Brother Mosen. Everyone turned to look at the source of the voice. At a glance, they saw a man who was obviously mixed race. He had black hair and blue eyes. He was tall enough to look down on the crowd. At a glance, they could tell that he was a very classy person. More importantly, he was very young and very handsome. Seeing such a character who looked like a weekly poster, everyone's eyes lit up. Li Mosen had long guessed that Li Jianyue would be very popular, but he didn't expect that his little girl would be blocked by so many people on the way home. Hearing that kid's words, he felt a little uncomfortable. Make friends? Heh. But this kind of discomfort immediately melted when Li Jianyue called him Brother Mosen. The corners of Li Mosen's mouth curled up, and he opened his arms to her. Li Jianyue, who was usually cold and aloof in front of her male classmates, laughed excitedly at this moment. She turned around and threw all the books to her roommates. Then, like a lark, she flew towards him. Li Mosen picked her up. Li Jianyue's laughter was crisp and clear. She hugged his neck tightly. The people behind him were all dumbfounded. This. Who would have thought that someone would appear out of nowhere? One of the boys behind Chen Yuan asked, classmately, "Who is this? He can't be your boyfriend, right?" Li Mosen put her down, and Li Jianyue smiled brightly. She stood on her tiptoes and raised her hand to hug his neck, but he was too tall, and Li Jianyue seemed to be hanging on him. However, Li Jianyue looked even more adorable in this way. Li Jianyue was a little pleased and proud. She said, "Yeah. My boyfriend." Li Mosen put his arm around her waist and lifted her up a little. He smiled politely and said, "Hello." The surrounding people looked at Li Mosen and then looked at Li Jianyue. Their eyes were filled with envy and jealousy. But with Li Jianyue's beauty, standing together with this mixed-race handsome guy, they were a real match made in heaven. Those who originally had some thoughts about Li Jianyue had completely given up at this moment. The opponent was too strong, and they didn't even have the desire to compete. Li Mosen looked down at Li Jianyue. "Do you have anything to do later?" "Nothing, we can go straight home." Li Jianyue's eyes curved. Then, as if she was showing off, she said, "I can drive now." "Did you drive here?" When Li Mosen heard this, he lightly clicked his tongue. "I don't dare to let you drive." "I'll drive." "Let's go." "No, let me try to drive you." "Then let's talk at home." No. Oh. Brother Mosen. Okay. He he he. End of full text. Please turn to the back Baidu to read the latest chapter of 99th Divorce Claw Bookhouse for free. Chapter 2320. Closing remarks for the 99th divorce. Please wait for a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.